Good morning. Welcome to the 2018 NEWEA Annual Conference. I'm Amy Anderson, Chair of the Program Committee. This year's premier water quality event and exhibit features 31 technical sessions, 2 poster board sessions, and over 200 exhibitors showcased on 2 floors throughout the next 3 days. The show kicked off yesterday afternoon with a very successful Young Professionals Summit. Thank you to everyone who helped make that a success. In keeping with this year's theme, Working for Water Quality, Who's With Us, I encourage you to stop by the YP technical session, student or poster board competitions, or attend the new workforce development session on Tuesday afternoon. If you're interested in joining a NEWEA committee, keep an eye out for the committee fair setup at various times throughout the show outside of Salon E. Don't miss out on the networking opportunities at both of the exhibit hall receptions, and be sure to congratulate the award recipients at the awards lunch on Wednesday afternoon. This year's program has a lot to offer, and I encourage each of you to take full advantage of it all. Our first speaker this morning is Tom Kunitz, current president-elect of the Water Environment Federation. Tom is the Assistant Director of Monitoring and Research for the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District of Greater Chicago, leading the district's efforts on key strategic initiatives. He has over 30 years of experience in the field of environmental engineering in both the public and private sectors, focusing on design of wastewater treatment facilities, improving the water environment, and protection of public health. A WEF member since 1992, Tom is the past chair of the Municipal Wastewater Treatment Symposium, a member of the Program Committee, a member of the Municipal Water Resource Recovery Design Committee. He was a member of the Chicago WEFMAX Organizing Committee and served on the Stockholm Junior Water Prize Organizing Committee with the Illinois Water Environment Association. Please join me in welcoming Tom Kunitz.
Thank you, Amy, for that, and good morning, everybody. I got a call last week from my mother. She said that her toilet was making this gurgling noise, and how could she fix that? And I don't know if this happens to any of you, but I am the go-to person in my family or my friends whenever there's something wrong with the toilet. They have this connection in their mind because I work in the sewage industry that I am the knowledgeable person in all things having to do with human excrement. And so they think that I'm the I'm not a plumber, right? But so I went on YouTube and figured out how to do this stuff. I imagine this happens to you folks too, right? You probably have your family and friends and neighbors who are not in the water industry, or you meet somebody at a party, oh, you're in water. What do you think of that stuff in Flint, Michigan, right? And you may not even be in drinking water. Or they'll ask you, how about the drought in California? And here you are on the complete opposite coast. Or maybe something closer to home. Maybe you have nothing to do with it, but they'll ask you about, Narragansett Bay, or they'll say, what do you think about the Long Island Sound nutrients and stuff, right? People think of you as experts, whether you think of yourself as an expert or not. The public that's not educated, and they think of you as an expert. And that's something you have to think about. Think about this. If you were sick, right, you didn't feel well, who are you going to go talk to? Are you going to go to your next-door neighbor who recently read an article in Reader's Digest magazine called 7 Life Hacks to a Better Gallbladder? Or are you going to go to a medical professional, a doctor, who is educated, knowledgeable, and experienced in human health? Unless you're from Vermont, you probably said doctor. And if you are concerned about your environmental health, aren't you going to go to somebody who is educated, knowledgeable, and experienced in the environmental health and public health? And that's what we are. We are those experts. And because of that, like it or not, we are leaders. People look to us to be leaders. Now, one of the best ways to lead, and if you are a parent, you know this already, the best way to lead is to lead by example. That's what I want to talk about today, about WEF and you and NEWEA leading by example. Now, there's many ways that WEF, with you as members, is leading by example. I don't have time to talk about them all, but I want to touch on one thing, and that's talking about the workforce of the future. And the workforce of the future, those are the engineers, the scientists, operators, technicians, who are going to lead this industry through the 21st century. And just some examples about how we're doing this. We're working with students, young professionals. You know, these are the people of the future. We had yesterday, NEWEA put up a really good YP summit. WEFTEC, we have the YP project that goes up, the service project. In fact, one of your own people from NEWEA, Anthony Giovanni, was instrumental in putting that up and working on this project to give back to the community and find meaning in their careers. And we provide opportunities with the Leadership Institute. For those of you who want to move on to leadership positions, if you haven't looked into the WEF's Leadership Institute, I highly encourage you to do so. And we're creating opportunities for operators with our online wastewater library and a new training manual that's coming out later this year. We have the Operations Challenge. And we are working at the national level to try to get reciprocity for operator certification so they can move from state to state and really make a career out of this. So WEF is working and driving to make change in our industry. If you've been to WEFTEC, I'm sure that you are familiar with our slogan at WEFTEC, which is, "We are the water quality people." Well, we also have a vision statement, which you're probably less familiar with. And our vision statement is, we are a community of empowered professionals creating a healthy global water environment. Now, our vision statement talks about who we want to see ourselves as in 20, 30 years in the future, or how the world is going to be different because we exist. This is a lot of words, but let me break this down for a minute. Community. What does community mean? Community is a group of like-minded people working towards a common purpose. This is a community, sharing ideas, collaborating, communicating, maybe not always agreeing, but that's okay, because that is healthy and that makes the community healthier. Empowered. That means we have power. We don't sit idly by, twiddling our thumbs, waiting for somebody to tell us what to do. We take action. We go out and solve problems. Professional. What's a professional? Somebody who is educated, knowledgeable, and experienced in what they do. And a professional has integrity. Work with integrity and speak with integrity. Integrity leads to trust. And once you have trust, you can lead by example. So this is such a wonderful community that you have here. I want you to take an opportunity. And I'm going to challenge you through these next 3 days of your conference to make the community stronger by making greater connections. Just like in our brain becomes stronger when our neurons make other synapses and connections with others. I want you to make a connection with somebody that you don't know, that you've never met before. If you sit down at lunch all the time with people you know, sit next to somebody you've never met before and introduce yourself. Go to the student poster competition. Meet a student. Find out about what they were doing. Give them a little piece of your wisdom. Make your community stronger. And if you're so shy that you can't even go do that, come up to me, and I will take you and introduce you to Jen Lockmeyer, and you will be a changed person. Thank you, and have a successful conference.
Thanks, that was fantastic. Our second speaker this morning is our current NEWEA president, Jim Barsanti. Jim is the Assistant Director of Water and Wastewater for the City of Framingham's Department of Public Works and has 32 years of experience in the water and wastewater field. He has a master's degree and a bachelor's degree from WPI and is a registered professional engineer in Massachusetts and Vermont. Jim is a NEWEA Grade 4 collection systems operator and a Massachusetts Grade 4 water distribution system operator in training. He has been active in NEWEA and WEF since 1992 and is a member of the Select Society of Sanitary Sludge Shovelers, the Golden Manhole Society, and was the 2014 Massachusetts recipient of the NEWEA Alfred E. Peliquin Award. Please join me in welcoming our NEWEA president, Jim Barsanti.
That was terrific, Tom. We really appreciate your remarks and opening up the session as you did. Really, really good stuff. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. And on behalf of the New England Water Environment Association, I welcome you and thank you for participating in our 2018 annual conference. Before I begin my remarks this morning, I would like to acknowledge our NEWEA staff, Mary Barry, Linda Austin, and Janice Moran, and our annual conference planning team, Elena Proakis-Ellis, Ron Tiberi, Amy Anderson, Helen Gordon, Kerry Reed, Paul P. Casey, Joy Lord, Mike Wilson, and Dennis Vigliotti for their efforts preparing and coordinating our conference, events, activities, and awards. Please join me in giving them a round of applause. I acknowledge the members of our NEWEA senior management team, President-elect Janine Burke-Wells, Vice President Ray Vermette, Past President Ray Willis, and Treasurer Priscilla Bloomfield, for your stewardship of the affairs of the association this past year and for your support of my efforts as president. My thanks to our NEWEA Executive Committee, our committee officers, and committee members for lending your time and talents to NEWEA's activities, programs, and initiatives. Finally, I thank our exhibitors and sponsors. We sincerely appreciate your commitment to this conference and your ongoing support. I extend NEWEA's warmest regards to Juliette Kayyem, today's keynote speaker. We commend you for your service to Massachusetts and our nation as a guardian of our homeland security. We especially acknowledge and salute you for your Distinguished Public Service Award as recognized by our United States Coast Guard as its highest honor awarded to a civilian. You have set a high standard of public service for us to follow, and we look forward to your remarks this morning with great anticipation. Many things bring us together today. I would first like to acknowledge those of you serving as operators in our public works departments throughout New England. You are on the front lines of our industry, steadfastly serving the public 365 days a year, regardless of the conditions or challenges, efficiently operating and maintaining our collection systems, pump stations, and treatment plants with dedication, ingenuity, and resolve. On behalf of NEWEA, I applaud you for your efforts and your commitment. Our theme for this year's conference is We're Working for Water Quality. Who's with us? This theme's elegance lies in its simplicity, perhaps a question that is less rhetorical and more philosophical, but unequivocally asking us if you are willing to serve. Our service theme can be illustrated by the words of President John F. Kennedy from his address to the graduating class of Vanderbilt University in May of 1963. President Kennedy said, "The educated citizen has an obligation to serve the public. One may be a precinct worker or a president. One may give his talents at the courthouse, the State House, the White House. One may be a civil servant or senator, a candidate or a campaign worker, a winner or a loser. But he or she must be a participant and not a spectator. At the Olympic Games," Aristotle wrote, "it is not the finest and strongest who are crowned, but they who enter the lists. For out of these the best are elected. So too in life, of the honorable and the good, it is they who act who rightly win the prizes." President Kennedy's words, like our theme, are a call to action, and we unconditionally accept the challenge to participate and serve. Whether you are a utility manager, engineer, operator, product representative, regulator, educator, administrator, each of you play an important and vital role protecting our water resources. NEWEA offers us an array of opportunities to get involved. In addition to our conferences and trade shows, we have our state and federal government legislative events, Water for People, Stockholm Junior Water Prize, Operations Challenge, Water Champions, and the Student Poster Competition, just to name a few. And I encourage you to participate in any way that you can. In addition to honing your professional skills, our NEWEA activities provide opportunities for personal fulfillment and fellowship with colleagues that will lead to lifelong relationships. Our focus this year has been on the growth and development of students and young professionals. We have highlighted the critical issue of mentorship and finding ways NEWEA can provide opportunities to establish and foster these relationships. One initiative is our Young Professionals Summit, which was held yesterday. The goal of the YP Summit is to bring young professionals in the water and wastewater industry together to learn from industry leaders and network with peers to provide a platform to develop skills and professional relationships. At this year's conference, The YP Committee is unveiling its program to directly pair up mentors and mentees, and I encourage you to consider participating. Our young professionals are the next generation of leaders, and we look forward to their vision and how we can improve and carry forth our mission and serve our membership and our society. Having worked with many of our NEWEA young professionals over the last several years, I can say without hesitation that the future success of NEWEA and our industry is assured. We have also emphasized our student outreach efforts. We revised our committee charges to challenge our NEWEA committees to conduct a student outreach activity each year. Admittedly, this is a lofty goal and one that will take some time to develop, but this effort is so critical to the future success of our profession that we must raise the bar high. Our public education and student activities committees are leading this effort, collaborating with elementary, middle, and high schools, vocational schools, and our colleges and universities, and have created tools and resources for our committees to utilize. These student outreach opportunities can be as simple as attending a career day at your child's school, presenting aspects of our profession to a classroom, or visiting with undergraduates at one of our New England colleges and universities. I know from my own experience that educators at all grade levels are grateful for and welcome opportunities to have us serve as guest speakers in their classroom. You just need to be willing to contact them and volunteer your time. Our water profession is rich with opportunities with a role for anyone willing to accept the call to join us, whether it be in operations, engineering, science, product sales and development, public relations, administration, finance, and regulatory. What better message to bring to young people than to challenge and inspire them to be the next generation of advocates, stewards, and protectors of the water environment, our Earth's most precious resource. I urge you to be creative, have fun, and seek out these opportunities, as the reward you will receive will far exceed your efforts, and the students' lives will be richer for it. Keeping with our service theme, I acknowledge the activities of our recently formed Veterans Workforce Development Committee that is being led by United States Navy veteran and Chair Dustin Price, United States Air Force veteran and Vice Chair Jeremiah Murphy, and Maine Water Environment Association past President Peter Goodwin. Under their wise leadership, NEWEA members have been reaching out to labor and workforce representatives at state agencies throughout New England to create awareness of our industry and develop new programs to directly connect veterans with job opportunities. We look forward to NEWEA being a leader, recognizing and serving and giving back to our veterans who have done so much to serve our nation. We work for water quality to protect and preserve our rivers, ponds, lakes, and oceans so they may thrive with ecological abundance and provide recreational destinations and activities for all people. We are blessed with these advantages, the advantages of these resources, because of the work we do every day to ensure they remain clean, fresh, and vibrant. On behalf of the New England Water Environment Association, I thank each of you for the work you do and for participating in our 2018 annual conference. I encourage you to eagerly embrace, participate, and be engaged in our activities this week so that we may have an informative, productive, and memorable time together. I humbly and respectfully thank you for this opportunity to serve as your president, and I look forward to connecting with you this week to hear about your stories, your successes, and your service to NEWEA, our water industry, and the world around us. We're working for water quality. Who's with us? Our response to this call, our legacy, and the story that it will tell is up to you. Thank you, and have a great conference. It is now my honor to introduce our keynote speaker. Juliette Kayyem is a national leader in homeland and national security. She presently serves as CEO of Zemcar, a lifestyle company focused on connecting busy parents with qualified drivers to solve their families' transportation needs. A frequent on-air national security analyst for CNN, she also serves as the faculty director of Homeland Security, the Homeland Security Project at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government, where she is also the Robert and Renee Belfer Lecturer in International Security. Previously, Juliette served as President Obama's Assistant Secretary for Intergovernmental Affairs at the Department of Homeland Security. She played a pivotal role in major operations, including the handling of the H1N1 pandemic and the BP oil spill response. She also organized major policy efforts in immigration reform and community resiliency. Before that, she was Massachusetts Governor Deval Patrick's Homeland Security Advisor, guiding regional planning and the Commonwealth's first interoperability plan while overseeing the National Guard. She is a recipient of many government honors, including the Distinguished Public Service Award, the Coast Guard's highest medal awarded to a civilian. Juliette's memoir, Security Mom, My Life Protecting the Home and Homeland, was published in 2016 and tells the stories of her professional life in Homeland Security and her personal life as a mother. Please join me in giving a warm NEWEA welcome to our keynote speaker, Juliette Kayyem.
Thank you, everyone. Oh, wow, lots of people here. Hi, I couldn't see from the front row. It is great to be here, even better because it was a reason to get out of the office. My office is in Cambridge. And just really grateful for all the work you do. Sort of before I got here, I have to admit I didn't know much about you all and just the tremendous efforts that you are putting into our communities and to, you know, is there any Cambridge people here? No. Oh, yay, thank you. Lee Street, just that's all I care about. Lee Street, everything else can go. And the public schools, actually, my kids are in public school, but besides that, we're fine. Okay, so here's what I'm gonna do today, because you're all subject matter experts in what you do and talking about subject matter expertise. I'm the subject matter expertise in everything that can go wrong, right? So like I'm the one who gets the phone calls like, is it safe to go to London this summer? Or, you know, should I be worried about H1N1? My personal favorite was because it merged Homeland Security with like parental angst was, is Tulane a good school? It's in New Orleans, you know, after Hurricane Katrina. I was like, that's like sort of the, you know, the tension between parental nervousness and college applications and Homeland Security. So what I'm gonna do today is take a sort of step back and sort of tell you where we are in Homeland Security and thinking about the vulnerabilities our nation faces, and in particular climate change, and the vulnerabilities to our critical infrastructure, of which you all are a part of, right, in terms of water and water treatment and servicing our communities. And I'm going to do that a little bit differently than what you're used to. You know, yes, I've been in this field. I've started off as a counterterrorism expert. Now I sort of more consider myself a Homeland Security expert. And I want to do this in a way that hopefully gets you to see sort of where my field is right now, because there's a lot of people who could give this presentation and scare you half to death, and I've like done that like most of my life, and I'm sort of tired of it. And part of what I want you all to leave with is sort of, okay, have I thought through, you know, the things that Juliette sort of, you know, said to think through, given the threats that we all face. So that's sort of where we're gonna be. Oh, okay. Oh, there we go. Okay, good. Okay, so remember, let's go back a bunch of years, right? So those of you remember September 11th, and a nation sort of came to the conclusion, although certainly we had all known it before, right, that the vulnerabilities of the homeland were you know, unacceptable, right? And so over the course of essentially 5 years, as the war in Iraq heated up, and as we started to think through the next 5 or 10 years, actually, you could do sort of, you know, the post 9/11 world in phrases, right? You remember these: the war on terror, red alert, green alert, with us or against us, security theater, the surge. But I will tell you, of all those phrases, none were sort of more harmful in terms of conceptualizing what our homeland was than the two words never again. Now, obviously, understandable when President Bush stands at the World Trade Center on September 15th and says essentially never again, that America's vulnerability, that our own vulnerabilities had to be closed. And that idea of never again, right, that any bad thing that happened in the United States was a sign, or let me say, any vulnerability, right, was a sign of our weakness, rather than a vulnerability just being a reflection of a country of 350 million people moving around all the time, right? That vulnerability was something that had to be closed. And so for 4 or 5 years, now I'm in this world. I had served on the National Commission on Terrorism before 9/11. I am a, singular terrorism expert. We really did focus as both a critical infrastructure matter, but also just more generally on how do we stop 19 guys from getting on 4 airplanes? Honestly, that was the way we thought about it, right? How do you do that? And so across the ledger of activity, we were very focused on terrorism and we were very focused on prevention. Now, I'm not complaining about that because we have stopped 19 guys from getting on 4 airplanes. I mean, in other words, the catastrophe of 9/11, it isn't that there isn't terrorism here, has not been able to be replicated. That is because of the work of the, of the agencies I had been a part of the military, of everything that we have done. But then 2001 marks a beginning. Those of you, me, who are older certainly know that wasn't the beginning. We had civil defense, we had, nuclear training. I grew up in California, earthquakes. We knew bad things could happen in America. But 2005, and I think interesting for your purposes, in my field becomes a pivot point, and it becomes actually the course correction. Now, admittedly, we didn't talk about it this way, but only upon reflection from 2018 can I say this. 2005 is when all the experience and the forces and the focus on protecting the homeland were unable to save an American city from drowning. Hurricane Katrina becomes a pivot point for the department, for the private sector, for the population, and certainly, I think, for those of us in the field. That a nation that focused too much on that one thing, on stopping that one thing, did not prepare itself for what we now call sort of an all hazards approach. Right? Which is someone like me now, yes, I worry about terrorism, of course, but the existential threat this country faces, as certainly many of you have, is the changes in the climate, call it whatever you want, in the political space. It's just the changes, right, that are occurring to our environment, the stronger storms, the harsher hurricanes, the elevated flood levels and seawater levels. Those are the challenges. And that a nation like ours, and those of us who are thinking about protecting the homeland, actually need to think about this all hazards approach, whether it's cyber, I mean, I didn't even know cybersecurity, right, when I get into the field in 1999, right? Doesn't exist, right? Pandemics, critical infrastructure, the Internet of Things, right? All of the damages, including terrorism, right? Still including terrorism. So that course correction then makes it easier for me as someone before experts to describe to you where you all fit into this, right? Which is the changes to our environment, for whatever debating the causes is for another. The changes to our environment are undeniable at this stage, right? As a issue for people who are worried about our critical infrastructure and who are worried about delivering services and clean water and other things to our community. So I literally took 2 seconds to find the most recent data, right? And that obviously also has an economic impact. So here's just 2, right? And I certainly knew this in the Obama administration, right? The billion-dollar storms become the norm rather than the rarity, right? So Sandy, just start naming them, right? And then you just look at this winter. And as a national security issue, of course, as all of you know, so forget just the homeland, the changes to the environment are is the reason why the Pentagon, for non-political reasons, right, just simply says the changing of the climate has become a national security issue. Why? Because wars start over scarce resources. Why? Because people move, refugees, mass migration, because they don't have the resources to provide for their family. That is where movement becomes instability, becomes a challenge for the Pentagon. It is why these issues and water scarcity have become national security issues. Because, just look at the history of the world. You're fighting over resources. That's what wars begin, and that's where refugees come from. There is a very strong academic notion, never can be proved as a single trigger, but what started as what we called the Arab Spring, which has become 10 years, and for Syrians, the Arab Nightmare, of course, but that the Arab Spring begins, right, with essentially a water issue, a drought, scarce produce, and a fight over or between a shopkeeper or a vendor and a government person who demands the fruit. This is the Tunisian who lights himself on fire and begins, right, what's known through that year as the Arab Spring. So this is real stuff. And so how to think about it? So what you have to remember is that in terms of your investments and thinking about what you do every day, and the risks that you face. So there's actually 5 pieces to a safe and secure, workforce, a safe and secure entity, a community, infrastructure, whatever it is. And it begins, of course, with prevention. What are you trying to prevent? And then protection. Then something happens, response, recovery, and resiliency, right? And look at the boom, right? So prevention and protection. Put all my money there in cybersecurity and protecting the infrastructure and protecting the resources, and yet the boom still happens, right? So this is, right? And you don't know what the boom is. You don't know, is it just the random thing you weren't anticipating? Is it the storm? Is it the fire? Is it the cyber attack that has, this is the thing I worry about the most, the cyber attack that has physical consequences in terms of the work that you do, the critical infrastructure work, right? You get the cyber attack, a vulnerability in the network. It has physical consequences because you're not able to do what you need to do. And then the boom, right? And then response, recovery, and resiliency. So over the course of this, 17 years now of Homeland Security, you've seen a shift from this focus on prevention and protection, right, where all the effort went essentially 2005, even post-2005, 2006, to a move to what we call right of boom, right? Right of boom. Left of boom is great. Try to stop the bad things happening. But a nation that assumes that there's going to be no boom is a nation that's vulnerable. In other words, the investments that you make right of boom in response, recovery, and resiliency actually make you more capable of preventing the harms in the first place. You are a stronger community, you are a stronger infrastructure, whatever it is. So people like me began to think about, well, what would happen if my orientation, if I thought about right of boom, right? Left of boom, I get. We know how to, that's the war, the killing, the intelligence, all that stuff, right? The walls, the whatever you name it, we got it, right? But what if we start to orient ourselves as a nation, and in particular within the critical infrastructure area, because most of it's owned by the private sector, on right of boom? What would that look like? What does that actually mean? We tend to think of resiliency as just a word. Oh, we'll just be resilient, right? So over the course of what I've done, I've become committed to sort of investments in resiliency. And I'm going to share those with you in just a little bit. But let me tell you what resiliency is not. It's not a mood, right? It's not just, oh, God, if only we were, just did more yoga and, made more love, like everything would be fine, right? Like, it's not a mood, right? It is actually investments in a system that is going to be more resilient to the boom. In other words, if you assume the boom, you're going to actually realize that there are things that you have failed to do to protect the system. This idea of resiliency actually has sort of a pop corollary besides Taylor Swift in this notion of keep calm and carry on, right? We hear it all the time, look, we're just, bad things will happen, and if we just sort of hunker down and come back, we're going to be fine. The keep calm and carry on mantra, I have to say, as many of you who are from Boston know, has its variants, whether it's keep calm and be fabulous, keep calm and don't let idiots ruin your day, that's a good one, or keep calm and eat chocolate, right? These are the variants. Like if we just sort of just chill out, right, we're going to be fine. And this idea of keeping calm and carry on, I think, is very misleading and is doubly misleading because it's not even true. This idea, most of you have heard of keep calm and carry on. So keep calm and carry on sort of hits our sort of zeitgeist as Americans in about, ironically, 2005 when Hurricane Katrina hits. And where did it come from? So most people who know this keep calm and carry on, most people think it comes from World War II, right? Now, talk about an existential threat, right? Hitler is now in France. The British are about to be bombarded by aerial war strikes. Churchill is hunkered down in his war councils underneath London. And so he starts to commission, at least in history, he starts to commission statements, sort of public statements to the world, to Brits, to get them engaged with the war. These include the ones, and the very famous one, loose lips sink ships, right? This idea that you have to be quiet. And so keep calm and carry on, when we start talking about it, is assumed to have been part of this Churchill mandate until someone actually figures it out. So this man owns a old bookstore in northern England. And in about 2005, he's looking in some old boxes in the back, and he opens one up, and there's all these posters, and he thinks they're really charming and witty. He puts them out, and people come by and they go, that's really interesting. What's the history of that? He goes, I actually don't know. But people start buying it. A magazine does a story on it. And that's when you sort of see the wildfire of this sort of idea of like resiliency is just a mood, is just sort of hunkering down. Turns out it was all a lie. Churchill did commission the statement. 2 million posters were made. They were going to go throughout London until he killed it. I mean, in other words, he didn't want it circulated. And why not? Because it was too passive, right? When you're actually threatened with the boom, right? And as I said, talk about an existential threat. That's not what he needed Londoners to do. You're not going to keep calm. The men are going to go to war. The women are going to go to work, and they are going to send their children to the countryside. In other words, if you think about resiliency and what it means as a word, means back, we all know that, but in Latin, siliency means jumping. Think about it as an active thing, right? It's not just sort of it is actually moving forward in meaningful ways. And I use that story because I want you to remember that as I go through thinking about how you all can think about building a more resilient system for cyber and physical challenges in the networks that you are a part of. These are mine, so, you guys can add 10 more if you want to, but I thought I'd make I didn't want to lose you to the coffee break. But anyway, I have studied systems and systems of commerce and transportation and everything else throughout my career, both in and out of government. And it seems to me that those systems, or at least what I'm going to provide to you, the systems that are the most resilient, right, are the ones who have actively engaged engaged in those investments, or those that are least resilient are those that have not. And I'm not denying that investments in resiliency are cheap or easy. I get it. These are complicated systems that are working in time, and you barely have budgets and everything. I just want you to think about these for the kind of risk mitigation planning that you all have to do, for the kinds of training and exercises that I hope you're thinking about, because I can't tell you what the boom is. Some of you may worry about cybersecurity more. Some of you may worry about hurricanes and flooding. Some of you may worry about insider threat. I can't tell you, and it kind of doesn't matter. In a world where anything can go wrong, as I said, assume the boom, and actually it's really liberating. Okay, so what do these 5 systems have? Let me just check my timing. Oh, I'm pretty good. What do these 5 systems have? The first is, of course, they have redundancies. That's one of the biggest challenges in critical infrastructure because they're hard to build and they're expensive to build. It's worth noting, though, the failure of having a redundancy is much more expensive. During the BP oil spill, President Obama had asked me, as many of you remember, we had a rough start, had asked me to come in as the Deputy National Incident Commander, deal with sort of the civilian side. So I know a lot about the BP oil spill. And for years, the industry in offshore drilling, now a debate back today, the industry had fought regulations or legislation to require a redundancy in the system. It's a high-risk adventure to be out 5 miles from the shoreline, or 1 mile from the shoreline digging 5 miles. And the industry fought it. And what they fought was a requirement to have a redundant blowout preventer. So some of you remember that word. A blowout preventer in offshore drilling is simply the suction that is getting the oil out of the ocean floor, right? And the industry has sort of convinced everyone, including the Coast Guard, right, that blowout preventers don't fail, right? That they are fail-safe, right? But the situation that BP found itself, and you can watch the movie and find itself, is that the MOJU, the surface area, fell, and it broke the blowout preventer. And so what basically the BP oil spill was a vacuum with no bag. That's my simple way of putting it, right? And we didn't know how big the well was for the oil. Canada requires a redundant blowout preventer, and they were about $350,000. At last count, BP paid $32 billion in remedies and reconstruction of the Gulf. So thinking about those even sort of minor redundancies that you want in the system, backup generators are of course required by law in hospitals now, but whether big or small, that would minimize the harm, because once again, I'm in a world where I'm assuming the boom. I'm assuming that you can't stop all bad things from happening, and all I want to do is help you get back to a more resilient system. The second is these systems have flexibility, right? And that's because they are assuming the boom. So this is my favorite example, and it's a hometown example. It's actually across the street example. I used to oversee the Boston Marathon planning for the state. The city is in charge, but the state has an overlay because it's across so many cities. And we used to think a lot about what if something happened at the finish line. We didn't know what it could be. And to be honest, when I first heard about I got a phone call from CNN, when I first heard about the boom, right, at the finish line, you just didn't know if it was a generator. You just didn't know at the stage. And the truth is that people there helping, the first responders, didn't know. But what they did or had done was they had trained for the possibility of some boom. So it ends up being 2 brothers from Cambridge, Massachusetts, right? They don't know that at the time. So that the training that they did wasn't just focused on surge capacity for a marathon. This is the public health entities that, people have blisters, they're exhausted, they're dehydrated. Those are the things you worry about in a marathon. They actually had trained and exercised for that pivot, for that capacity to be flexible because you didn't know what the boom was. And that meant, right, going from dealing with exhaustion and dehydration to dealing with essentially a war zone. And in my world, you can't just judge whether, success by whether the bad thing happened. It'd be good if no bad things happen. You also judge it on on your response after the boom. So 3 people died at the finish line, a tragedy, of course. 297 severely harmed, severely injured people, loss of a limb, loss of 2 limbs in some cases, were transported to area hospitals, including Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Hampshire, and elsewhere, and not a single one of them died. I can't call that success publicly, but in my field, the difference between 3 dead and 300 alive who are living today, right? Because of the capacity for a public health system and a first responder system to completely pivot and be flexible is success, right? So we can scream and yell about, terrorists and whatever, But that's a success. And so thinking about, have you trained your teams? Have you been trained to think about what would you do? Just the generic boom, right? What would happen? What are your protocols? How do you deal with the system? How do you deal with your customers? How do you deal with the community? How do you deal with your colleagues or people who work for you? That's why we do training and exercises, right? That is why, because we don't know when or what the boom will be. And this gets to the third part. Systems that are most resilient are those who have thought through fail-safe systems. So that's just a wonky word, or now I'm going to be wonky again, of how do you stop the cascading losses of a breakdown in the system. So you all are in a lot of your systems, they're local or municipal, they're attached to state, they're whatever. How do you protect the cascading losses so that the system, if the boom happens, doesn't completely die, right? How do you stop it somewhere in between nothing happening and everything is shut down? And is that possible, right? And thinking about what fail-safe systems do you have in your infrastructure, in your planning, in your networks, whatever it is, whether it's cyber, water, or both in some cases, to make sure that you've protected the system. So this is my favorite example. So as I've mentioned Hurricane Katrina a lot, it had a big impact on our field for obvious reasons. So after the Superdome, remember what happened to the Superdome during Hurricane Katrina, the architects and designers and the critical infrastructure, entities that are building the new Superdome, now owned by Mercedes, think, we'd be idiots to think that there won't be another boom. We don't know what the boom is. We're going to think it's hurricanes because we're New Orleans. But shame on us if we build again, less resilient than we were before. Remember, the roof came off. It wasn't prepared for mass evacuations. It was a nightmare for people who ended up there during when the levees broke. And so they build a system, and they build at least the electrical grid in a way that thinks, okay, look, there could be a boom, right? There could be something in which the grid is impacted within the system, and how do we create fail-safe? So Beyonce performs at the halftime. She is accused, but she actually, of being responsible for this, she actually wasn't. She had brought her own generator platform. And in the third quarter, the lights go out. And many of you were probably watching, of course. And the Superdome goes in half dark. So people like you are watching and thinking, that's absolutely horrible and terrifying and crazy, and I can't believe it. And people like me are thinking, that's an awesome fail-safe system, right? Because what they did is they built it in a way that when the system picked up that it was actually collapsing, it essentially protected itself. It essentially just created a bifurcated grid system so that the other half would remain in light, right? In other words, it didn't have a single point of failure. And that is great because from the perspective of someone like me, first of all, once again, you don't know what the boom is. Is this a terror attack? Is this something going? Is this a cyber attack? A stadium in half light is much better than a stadium in all dark, right? This is how you measure success, right, of boom. The fourth is, of course, the capacity for a system to rapidly rebound. I'm sure a lot of you think about that a lot. It's the pressure customers are going to put on you. Customers, during an ice storm, they're forgiving. During, some incident, they can be forgiving for 24, 36, at about 36, maybe about 24 hours, they start getting pissed. And they want to know, when is it back? Right, like they knew that something bad happened, and people can be forgiving, and so part of this is communication, what are you telling them, but part of it is how can your system rebound? So our MBTA here is notoriously non-resilient because it assumes that snow is new every year, right? And it's unforgivable at this stage. I mean, I know we laugh about it. It is absolutely unforgivable, mostly because other cities have figured it out. Do you think Boston is the only cold, snowy city to have outdoor transit systems? It's this myopia of the way we've planned the system. They've figured out how to melt train tracks. They figured out how to protect the trains during the storm itself so they're not covered in snow. This is not rocket science. We have built the system to get it back where it was pre-snow, right, as if the snow is not coming next year, right? And that's, and like, you know, welcome to those of us who live here, welcome to our world. It is so objectionable from any perspective of critical infrastructure planning. And it's objectionable because other cities have figured it out. So after Hurricane Sandy, right? So over the years, New Jersey and New York, some of you probably know this, just given the field you're in, you know, we're you know, well aware that the waters were rising, well aware that hurricanes were getting stronger, well aware that the system could flood. And instead of spending all their money on trying to stop that from happening, which of course we all should try to do, right? They then begin to think, well, what would we put in the system so that when it comes down, people are forgiving, they get the boom, how do we rapidly rebound? And that system meant that after Hurricane Sandy, the entire system, right, they're flushing out water, they're protecting the trains, all the stuff they did, the entire New York, New Jersey transit system is back up and running 4 days after Hurricane Sandy. And I'm looking at people from Boston here who know what happened 2 or 3 winters ago when the system was not entirely up and running until April, right? That's called like spring, right? It's just objectionable, as I said. So thinking about it, you can just imagine from a customer service perspective, right? And then you've got, you know, the government over you and whatever. What have you done to think about what have other cities done? What have other states done to rapidly rebound? And then the fifth, right? So I'm right a boom, I'm building a resilient system is, of course, I'm going to assume that the boom is going to happen again. Right? I'm going to assume that a nation as vulnerable as ours can only spend so much on stopping the bad things from happening. It doesn't mean I don't want to mitigate climate change. It doesn't mean, you know, on a personal level, I'm not worried about gun control. All those things that someone like me worries about. But it also means that I have to assume that a nation, like, and I mean this, like, our vulnerabilities are like actually a sign of our success, right? That a nation that is about the flow of people and goods and ideas every single second is going to have vulnerabilities. I like to remind people, look up at the sky right now. There's 1 million domestic travelers a day and domestically. It's a different million tomorrow. That system, right? All of these systems are going to have inherent vulnerabilities. What you're trying to do is reduce the risk, but begin to think about the post-boom world. And so systems that are more resilient are ones that know that the boom will happen again. And they have a rigorous lessons learned capacity. This happens in the military, of course, those of you, what we call them after action reports as first responders. But they have to be honest, they have to be real, they have to be critical, they have to be able to provide you, your boss, or the people that work for you a template because you're gonna assume the boom again. And so this is in some ways my favorite example because it shows that I think it also puts things in perspective sometimes. So while we had a tragedy on 9/11, just a few years later, those in Southeast Asia, 500,000 people were lost in just a few moments during the tsunami, and then of course another 250,000 died due to the consequences of that. How people die matters, especially to people like me. That they die matters, but how they die matters, because it's the how that you can think about protecting it. Now, I deal with life and, those issues. You guys can ratchet it down a level in some instances, in others you can't, right? But thinking about how, what can you learn? How something happened matters than just the fact that it happens. It is, as we enter blizzard season, or we sort of pass it, it's why governors have sort of bans on driving during blizzards. It's not because it's a nanny state, like those of you from New Hampshire. Like, it's not like we love your live free and die thing, but like, please. And let me tell you why. It is because during blizzards, including the famous blizzard here of '78, that 100 people died is a tragedy, but how they die is a lesson. 79 of them died. People don't die from blizzards, from carbon monoxide in cars, because there was no travel ban, because people get into cars, they try to go from point A to point B, they get stuck, they can't get out to clear the exhaust fume, and they die. So that's why you're not allowed to drive, because it reserves, first responder capacity, but because actually with that one 12-hour inconvenience, you can save 100 lives, or 200 or 300, right? So I end with this on the tsunami. So people in disaster management, people who think right of boom, think, okay, so this is a tragedy, and they go back and they try to figure out how people died. Not that they did, which is the tragedy, but how, which is the lesson. And you would think, as someone like me would think, because I don't know that much about tsunamis, that, okay, well, everyone, within 100, or I'm going to guess 500 feet of the shoreline died, and then fewer people died behind that, and then even fewer behind that. Not actually what happened. What happened, if you looked at the coastline in particular of Thailand, is Village A had 92% survival. Right next to it, Village B, 98% death. Next to it, 76% survival. Next to that, the hotel, 98% fatality. What's going on? What is that about? How can people right next to each other, right on the shoreline, survive and not survive? So it turns out that there was a tsunami of 1904 that had similar consequences. I think it's 04, similar consequences to the more recent tsunami. And the lesson that great-great-great-great-grandfathers told their great-great-great-great-grandchildren, and so on and so on and so forth, or their children, through the generations, was that when the waters recede, run for the hills. The survivability rate was in older villages, was in more established villages, that the lesson doesn't have to be sophisticated, passed on from generation to generation, was something I would not have known had I been staying at a hotel in Thailand. That's why they had such international fatality rates of foreigners, is when the water recedes, get the heck out, right? And so those villages, when they see the water recede, are running for the hills. The newer ones see fish. This is amazing. I have to tell you, as a visitor, until the tsunami, I don't know if I would have known that. And so thinking about ways in which it's not just the what. You're not going to stop a tsunami. You're not going to stop all the hurricanes. But also the how. How do you want to build your system and your lessons learned so that the next time you're better, you're stronger, you're more resilient? That's what you owe the communities you work in. That's what you owe as a sort of critical infrastructure entity. And I think for many of you, that's what you owe as a boss and as a leader in your community. So I'm going to leave with the final, don't ignore the boom. It's actually, if you think I'm I generally have a nice disposition, it's because every day I think about the boom and it generally doesn't happen, so it's a good day. So be like me, assume the boom, and when you go back, you may not be able to do all these 5 things, but I can't tell you what the boom is, but I can tell you how to think about the challenges that you will face and what you wish you would have done right of boom. So thank you very much for that. Oh, I guess I'm taking questions. I went over. Oh, no, pretty okay.